Welcome everyone to the World FinTech Festival India 2021. And we are back to you with a Power Pack panel or a trialogue today. Our next panel discusses the rise of open finance solutions in India. When we consider banking today, we notice more and more examples of how banking as a function has begun to fade. We like to say that the banking is increasingly enmeshed in the world of fintech services, financial services, venture capital-driven fintech businesses, and major digital platforms. The term embedded simply refers to being surrounded by another function or feature. One may now envision a scenario where, in which practically every facet of traditional banking is simply inconspicuous feature of another industry's product or service experience. Now, moderating this panel or our next dialogue on the rise of open finance and embedded solutions today is Ganesh Rangaswamy, Managing Partner, Kona Capital, and who is joined by Mr. Prashant Ranganathan, Chief Executive Officer of PayU Credit, as well as Mr. T.R. Ramachandran, Group Country Manager of India and South Asia Visa. Over to you, Ganesh. The panel is all yours.
Thank you, Amit. Thanks for the intro, and great to be here, and delighted to be welcoming Ram and Prashant to this panel along with me. And I was just taking off. Why don't we start by probably giving the floor to Ram and Prashant so they can introduce themselves, and then we can dive into the panel. Ram, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Amit, and thanks, Ganesh, for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here at the FinTech Festival. I've been working in financial services for close to 30 years now, having worked with organizations like Citibank earlier, where I ran retail banking for India, ran a large life insurance company called Aviva. And then 6 years earlier, I joined Visa in the exciting world of payments. And it's never been a dull day since, starting from demonetization to COVID and everything in between. It's safe to say that the digital journey taken in India and South Asia has been remarkable, and I've been fortunate to be part of the journey. And of course, along the way, meet fascinating people like you and Prashant, so the journey has been fun.
Thank you. Thanks, Ram. Prashant, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ganesh, and thanks, folks, for having me as well. Yeah, so I run PayU Credit here in India and that journey started in Jan 2020 for me. So you may have heard of brands like PaySense and LazyPay, that falls into PayU Credit. Prior to this, I was running a startup called PaySense, which was one of India's largest consumer digital lending startups, which eventually got folded into PayU in Jan 20. Prior to that, I was at PayPal, did 2 stints at PayPal, one in San Jose, where I was part of I basically ran new ventures risk for PayPal. And in that avatar, I launched both their consumer and merchant credit platforms. And then subsequently was the head of product for APAC for PayPal. So again, that's my payments and credit history. But yeah, I am excited to be here and part of this panel today.
Thank you. Thanks, Prashant. And I guess I'll just round that off with saying that Prashant and Ram both are extremely well-known folks in the world that traverses financial services and fintech, and very deep roots in payments. I can't claim to have as deep roots in payments as they do. I'm more a fintech dilettante, but delighted to be learning from both of them. And to just give a quick intro of myself, I manage a fund called Kona Capital, which is a global fintech and fintech adjacencies fund. And we focus primarily on emerging markets across Asia, Africa, LATAM, and Middle East, and invest typically at the earliest stages of fintech startups. So let's get started. I guess as both of you have alluded to, there's lots going on in the ecosystem. I guess we have open finance and API driven solutions evolving, which are making it more seamless and easier to develop financial services in various contexts, which was probably not easily imaginable even a few years ago. At the same time, we're also seeing accelerated digitization in the overall ecosystem, which is probably enabling this as well. We're starting to see more ambition and execution from large non-financial services platforms, whether it's the Flipkarts of the world, so on and so forth, in terms of wanting to embrace this change. And then there is a broader question of what happens to the traditional financial services foundational players, whether it's bank, whether it's larger financial service institutions, so on and so forth in this context. So there's probably lots to unpack in terms of what's going on in the ecosystem. And I think it will be great maybe to have both of you help the audience, guide the audience here through how do you see things unpacking from your vantage point. So maybe let's start with simple context setting, in the context of Visa and from your vantage point, Ram, what does open finance and embedded finance in that context mean for you?
Thanks, Ganesh. And I think it's always helpful to set the context. I think it started when all of us and folks in the audience were looking at this sort of space 3-4 years ago. We would have been talking open banking. There's a subtle but definitive shift on the right of the sort of access to move from open banking to open finance, and I dare say a couple of years down the track into an open economy. It means is starting from sort of the PSD2 context, which people are familiar with, of banks needing to open their APIs, was the limited context of open banking. And on the other side of the spectrum, you had the US, where there was, for lack of a better phrase, screen scraping. And it was a sort of, pretty much, open market. And now we're sort of moving away not only from open banking, but also to the whole 360 degree of whether it's insurance, whether it's investments, whether it's other cash flow mechanisms, digital identity, very importantly. And of course, this cuts across regulators, the securities regulator, insurance regulator, the mutual funds regulator, and the banking regulator. And open finance, therefore, enables a truly 360 degree view. And that enables organizations in turn at the sort of simplest level to create bespoke customer experiences. Whether those experiences help the customer, like think of an SME and how that SME can be helped in terms of accounting and bookkeeping, or typically in the more traditional lending, wealth management sort of use cases. But I think it's important to stress the sort of layers of information carried on open finance is perhaps order of magnitude higher than what would have been an open banking rails. I think that's one sort of perspective to think about it.
Fair enough. So yeah, the open finance is a much broader implementation across the ecosystem than open banking. And Prashant, what do you think about it?
Yeah, so I think I'll step back a little bit. I think we're from a lazy pay vantage point. I think what we're observing is a fundamental shift in relevance, right? So I think the banking services and the utilization of banking services is at an all-time high, but who's providing it to the customer is changing, right? So what I'm seeing is that there is a shift in relevance, perhaps a shift in trust, where consumers are now often showing up at Swiggy, Dunzo, Amazon, Flipkart, a lot more, Netflix, if you may, a lot more than they are at the traditional financial, institution, right? They're not opening up their bank apps. They don't really relate to the bank apps. And I think, that's the shift that I'm seeing. So I look at my own patterns and I see what my customers are doing. They are more likely to open a Google Pay app or a Phone Pay app to do the same money transfers, do the same payment out of the underlying bank that they hold, than to open the bank's app, right? So fundamentally, that relevance of who is creating the experience and who's owning that experience versus who's manufacturing and managing the customer's account has been decoupled. And I think that is only accelerating as we move forward in time. The second is, I think this could be, for a few reasons, right? I think historically, what customers have seen is that these new age tech-enabled companies, e-tail systems are a lot more customer friendly. They're more responsive and have clear rules of engagement, right? I think hence the trust levels are much higher. With the traditional institutions, I think world over, there is a systematic decay in trust. Hence a systematic decay in relevance. Now, that's where I see a split, right? There's a lot of casual banking that is now switching to these ecosystems. So I wouldn't be surprised if more and more lending happens on the form of BNPL inside these ecosystems, right? So one could say, hey, look, HDFC Bank or ICICI Bank still does more personal loans than anybody else. That will always perhaps remain the case, but that's deep banking, as I call it. The casual banking, which is like the spends, the buy now, pay later, the micro investments, all that will perhaps shift out, and that will be the first sign. And we're already seeing that, right? Over the last year and a half, especially, there's a massive acceleration. And that is, again, possible because we have kind of digitized our way into some of this open banking, open finance constructs. And that's further augmented by what's happening in OpenAI, etc. The second point I want to make, and that we're seeing, is we actually see two parallel things happening in India today, right? One is open data and one is open banking, right? So I think what Ram was alluding to is a lot of that data becoming available and becoming available with customer consent in a more clean way, with a one-click digitized manner. And that is of course going to mushroom a whole set of whole generation of fintech and e-commerce applications. On the flip side, we're also seeing open banking, which is a little bit, or open banking APIs, SDKs, which I think will enable a lot of that embedded financial experiences, where perhaps in the future you'll go into a Flipkart and that's where you'll do your savings, your borrowings and spending within the context of what you do on a Flipkart platform, not jump out to do something else. So that's what we're observing, and I think that's accelerating as well.
Yeah, fair enough. And to your point, we are already seeing casual banking or casual, more casual or everyday life financial solutions moving, shifting quite significantly. Obviously, some of the more serious activities still clearly are beholden to the banks and larger financial institutions. But yeah, as we go along this discussion, I'd love to talk about how we are seeing a shift there as well. So one maybe thought coming out of this and out of your last few comments, Prashant, and the question for both of you is open finance from a financial services institution or fintech architecture perspective, and embedded solutions, embedded finance from a non-financial services platform perspective. Are these just two sides of the same coin, or it's kind of too simplistic a way to look at it? And there is layering, like you said, there is casual banking, there is obviously more serious activities. There are certain things which require more trust, like savings and so on and so forth. And there are certain things which are more about credit worthiness and things like that. And the relationship between the the service provider versus the customer is different in this various contexts. So is that too simplistic a way to look at it, and there is layering, or eventually that's what it will become? They're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, so Ganesh, interesting question and interesting perspective to look at it. From Visa's perspective, and from what I think about it, is one is a subset of the other actually. Open finance enables the sort of center of plate use case, which is embedded finance. Right? About it, it enables, at the root of it, what is embedded finance? It need not be deeply embedded. Embedded calls to mind something which is deeply buried inside something, right? But if you recharacterize it as invisible, friction-free, and contextual, whether it is credit or information or data or whatever it is, right? Those are the three variables. Contextual meaning right there, to Prashant's point, whether it's Dunzo, whether it's sort of Zomato, whether whatever it is, at the time I need it, not the time that the financial institution wants to thrust something down my throat. And it's invisible because I don't have to navigate a bunch of screens and jump out of one and jump, the whole old WeChat super app model of everything within the app sort of thing. You don't leave the ecosystem to do anything. And very importantly, it's drawing a bunch of things in flight, point of checkout, point of sale in a friction-free manner. Super important. And earlier people used to struggle to architect that, keeping data privacy, keeping permission, keeping customer consent, etc., front and center. But now Open Finance actually enables those experiences in a seamless. So one leads to the other. I'm not necessarily sure one is a sort of subset of the other. And in fact, I'm sure we'll talk about the account aggregator framework in India for the benefit of those who are not familiar with it a little later. But that's exactly what that sort of enables of these account service providers and loan service providers, etc. Right? So that's the thing. I mean, that's one sort of lens, not the only lens, but certainly one lens to look at it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Prashant, what do you think?
To add to that, I actually like the two sides of the coin analogy, to be honest, Ganesh, because look, I think there are experience creators on one side, and then there are manufacturers on the other side, right? Now, you can also, historically, the manufacturers were also responsible for the experience creation, and they probably didn't do as great a job, and I know that's another debate for another time. But today, the experiences are, like, you can look at like how people are using their mobile phones or their screen time, right? Those experiences are very much in either a game or a social network or an e-tail, or, you know, and the frequency is definitely not inside banking applications, right? So the experience has fundamentally moved out. The eyeballs and the time of eyeballs has moved out into another hemisphere. Now, that hemisphere has customers, has technology, has the right beautiful experiences, and has the context of what the customer is trying to do, right? But may or may not have the licenses, may or may not have the products to manufacture, right? They may not actually carry insurance. They may not actually carry lending. They may not actually be, you know, carry the licenses to process payments, for example, right? Now, that's where and I am creating a conscious polarization here. That's where you get the other side, where this might be the incumbents, the banks, the financial services institutions, where they are carrying the licenses, they carry the regulatory like overhead, oversight, they do manufacture the product, and may or may not, you know, be completely relevant in terms of experiences, right? Now, that's where you have, on one side, you have the people who are providing the beautiful digital experiences, and the other side, you have the manufacturers. And the way they both talk to each other is perhaps through Open Finance or through SDK embeddedness. Now, just to lead you further to a certain direction, where I get confused, and these two sides of the coin make sense, where I get confused is a intermediary or a digital bank or a neobank, where they're simply taking the old analog manufactured product, applying a digital lipstick, if you may, and providing it out to an experience. That's where I think you're going to see some compression. I think the primary two entities, I think they're in good shape. It's the intermediary in the middle who is doing the digital overlay on an analog kind of product base. I think that's where I see some compression. Either they become embedded inside the digital experiences product offerers like e-tailers, or they become service providers to the traditional financial institutions. So either way, I think that's where I see that, and that's how I think of the polarization.
No, that's interesting, and I was saving this thought or question for later. But since you brought it up, if you look at the world which is fast moving to customers being more naturally drawn to platforms which drive the experiences, and the traditional providers kind of becoming manufacturers. And again, it is simplification, as we agreed. What's the future for large manufacturers, especially who clearly are incumbents and very, very integral part of the economy and the financial service ecosystem? And what stops them from becoming the platforms, experience platforms? And they did have that chance, but where do you see this going in that case? And the second part of this question, which Prashant, is the point you made on intermediaries, those who come in between. And even there are probably two kinds of players. One who can become underlying architecture for some of the foundational services, part of the underlying architecture, and we have multiple fraud, security, auth, KYC, those solutions evolving. And then those who are just kind of enabling plumbing by helping stitch the various, both the manufacturers and the experience folks together. And it's unclear what their future is, and if there should even be a future. So I would throw the question back at both of you saying, one, we have multiple ecosystem players that start emerging when there is new innovation or evolution, and it's unclear whose role is what. But at least the traditional folks who have been dominant run the risk of kind of becoming, as you said, Prashant, only manufacturers. What stops them from being the experienced leaders and not seeing this sort of ship sail by? And it, again, both for question for both of you.
If I may, Ram. So look, I think the aspirations of both parties are to go in the opposite direction, right? And that's both natural as well as interesting, in my opinion, right? I don't hesitate for a moment to think that some of these large commerce, e-tail, gaming, social platforms looking to have at an arm's length a financial institution that can manufacture for them, right? Because like I've always used the analogy, a train can only go as fast as the rails allow it to, right? So you can't say I'm going to build all these amazing experiences and product for a customer and then expect that to be delivered by someone you don't have full control or line of sight over. So I see them going one direction. But at the same time, look, mind you, the incumbents in India are very, very strong, right? They have customers, they have millions of customers that they've onboarded over years. And the attempt from them is to start creating those experiences, right? Like often where I hesitate a bit is when someone from the traditional financial institution says, oh, but this is just like HTML and CSS and I can just change the design. But it's more than that, right? It's not just the sheen, it's way beyond that. It's a process. It's how you collect information, how you display information, how you take a customer from point A to point B. But they will figure that out, right? It's not impossible. They may also look to bring commerce inside or gaming inside. And I think there will be some of that that'll happen as well. It's a question of who can out innovate the other and in what time frame. So it's just it's an interesting time. The folks in middle, I do wonder about, and I think the valuations and the venture community is of course very active amongst the folks in the middle, but I'd like to see like where they all end up and if those can actually be justified. Again, controversial for another time perhaps.
I'm happy to talk about it. If you can figure the answer out, let me also know. But Ram, what do you think?
I think the one more perspective I'd like to offer up is that the use cases for lack of a better word, incumbents are somewhat different than the use cases for the so-called experience providers. I think we should not lose sight of that. And I partially buy Prashant's argument that sort of they're all converging in the opposite direction. Let's take one instance, okay? Micro and small enterprises, where the credit gap in India is, depending on who you speak to, estimated between $500 to $700 billion, right? Cash flow based lending has not been a particularly successful underwriting paradigm, putting on my erstwhile banker hat. However, now if you think about it, when I first sort of laid out the sort of framework of saying it's not just open banking, but it's open finance, theoretically you could get GST data, supplier vendor financing data, you could get sort of income tax data, you could get sort of bureau data, of course. And then on top of that, you have various other surrogates on the basis of which alternative underwriting paradigms can be built. I doubt very much whether somebody who wants you to split your, buying a pair of jeans into 3 installments, particularly has either the wherewithal balance sheet wise or the intent to lend to a sort of Unilever distributor in middle India. So we ought to keep that in mind. And I think there'll be intersection sets because banks do want to get into retail lending and so on and so forth, and the retail balance sheet is growing. Interestingly, where Visa sits on the payment side of it, we see, what is the phrase you use, Prashant, the middle layer and the experience layer and the incumbents all using sort of our products and solutions. So we get a sort of interesting take on who's sort of using it and twisting it into what shape in order to force fit it, be it identity and authentication or authorization protocols or protocols or form factors, etc., etc. And the very last point to make is that in India, what Bureau did when CIBIL started and Experian and Equifax and the whole 9 yards after that, did to retail unsecured lending and credit cards in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. And that was a paradigm shift that enabled the large 800-pound gorillas like HDFC Bank and ICICI and so on, to name a few, make a huge dent into retail banking, right? I anticipate multiple X of that effect of the account aggregator framework in India. We should not understand how incredibly powerful it's going to be to lend to that underserved layer, right? And I'm not even getting into insurance where India is woefully underpenetrated. How do you underwrite insurance is really hard in India, right?
Yep.
It's term insurance, and how to underwrite sort of crop insurance and so on. Anyway,
absolutely.
Use cases are different. Different players will use it differently, but these rails are going to be very, very powerful in terms of creating an ecosystem which we are only beginning to scratch the surface. It's
fair enough.
We think it is at this point in time.
Fair enough. No, that's I think super helpful in broadening the lens and context. And I think so. Let's switch gears and go in the direction which you already started us off on. So if you look at the India has also uniqueness in terms of this whole confidence that we are developing on public infrastructure side. The public tech infrastructure side, and there is a glass half full and glass half empty view to this. And there is also there's a maturity of the cycle as well. I think on day one, everything is not clear, and there are a lot of stakeholders who have to come together, etc. So we are seeing obviously evolution of UPI and its implementations, the account aggregator framework now coming in, OCEN, which has been sort of the open credit enablement network, which has kind of been experimented with, but still probably in its nascency. So, I don't want to get too technical and deep into this because we run the risk of just spending rest of the time on it. But would be great for both of you to share your perspective on what do you see as the role of this, and how can it really enable the ecosystem while also fostering private enterprise, or if we believe certain aspects will be owned by the public infrastructure, and essentially folks have to build on top of it.
Let's talk about two different things very, very quickly, and then I'm sure Prashant has his own view on it. The framework for AA or account aggregators is somewhat different than OCEN. So we'll come to OCEN in a bit, but account aggregator, two big changes. US said laissez-faire, UK said, we're laying down the rules and everybody's got to do it and open up your APIs. And India is somewhere in between an account aggregator sort of framework, right? You can participate if you want to, but suit yourself sort of thing, which is exactly what they did with bureaus in the mid-90s. And therefore, banks have to find a compelling use case to say, always the inherent risk is, from a walled garden, I become an open garden. What do I lose versus what do I gain?
Yep, exactly.
It's going to be a torrent of outflow of customers, all of whom will desert me and go away because I'm opening my kimono, as it were. And therefore, should I protect it in some fashion? Should I participate? What am I getting? Obvious questions, right? The second important thing about AA is that it's anonymized, which means the account aggregator provider, who themselves need to be a licensed entity and apply for a specific RBI license, is effectively a dumb pipe, because they cannot read, they cannot add value, they cannot add an analytics layer or a security layer, because they cannot read the information. They only have the protocols, right? And they build a sort of API layer to carry it from point A to point B. Point B being the sort of the sort of trusted provider of the customer, and point A being the erstwhile lender. Now, we can think of various value-added services models coming on top of it. For example, if I pull a bank statement, how do I put it into a format which is decipherable to the underwriter? Something as simple as that to something as complex as deciphering or backward engineering cash flows from GST return. you do need a value-added services layer pipe on top of it. It's going to be interesting to see who builds that. Is it going to be another person who will insert themselves into the value chain? Because it's certainly not the AA provider.
Yeah.
So that is not an overly prescriptive infrastructure. The RBI is obviously stressed and gone heavy on the privacy side of things, which is why the anonymized pipe. But there will be another layer of value-added services. And even companies like Visa, we see ourselves playing a role in carrying from point A to point B in a manner which is sort of sensible and useful. Oken, on the other hand, attempts to create a sort of prescriptive framework for it. Now, in the chaotic, innovation-filled world of Indian entrepreneurship, will getting overly prescriptive lead to straitjacketing is a sort of a $64,000 question, but that's for another day.
Yeah, Ram, I think you are being quite polite. I can translate it in a better language, but I'll spare the audience of that for now. Prashant, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I think with UPI as a primary example, I think I'm a huge believer in India public tech, right? I also think I agree with Ram. Not all of these things work on day one, right? I think we all know UPI when it started working, but there was a year and a half prior to that where it wasn't working, right? It was still quite a fragile technology. Setting up a handle was painful. You couldn't just use a phone number. Discovery was painful. So I think these things take time, as they should. And I think, but once they get going, I think they move volumes, right? They move large economies on the back of them. So I'm a huge believer in both AA, Oken, but I think Oken also, like while we have a certain format today, I think maybe that will also relax and it'll evolve, and I think we will get to a point where it does become something people can build on top of very easily. So yeah, look, I think like I said, there's open finance and there's open data. I think it's inevitable. Today we do have an open data of sorts. It just requires a lot of pain on behalf of the customer, where they have to go to their bank, download something. The authenticity of that download is unknown. They then provide that PDF. It's not digitally signed. We don't know if it's been tampered, or even worse yet, they print it and then they hand it over, and you don't know if that's an authentic print or if someone has tampered with that document. And then we do, pseudo lending on top of that data, right? So it's kind of garbage in, garbage out, because we're looking at data where we have low confidence, low trust. We're applying models to correct for that low confidence, low trust, and then we're giving a suboptimal outcome to the user. My hope is when all this comes through a trusted pipeline, then at least our confidence and our trust level on that data when we get it is much higher. Hence, our decisions and our outcomes for the customer are much better. So, but yeah, I think that's on its way. I would definitely not bet against large public tech, not after the success UPI has seen. So I'm very much on board.
Got it. Fair enough. So don't bet against public tech, what you're saying. So maybe switching gears and thinking sort of beyond India, from the Indian vantage point, but both of you obviously see fair bit of global context and models across sectors. And I guess we are seeing different kinds of open banking and open finance models evolve in various countries. Ram referred to what's going on in the US and UK, etc. But also there's been a global financial services ecosystem set up where there is a degree of uniformity or common standards or some accepted standards on which the system works. Now, the way we are seeing this being rewritten, obviously it's happening in different, in some parts sporadically, some parts maybe thoughtfully, but no evolution or revolution can happen uniformly. How do you really see all of this leading to some kind of sanity when we talk about data sharing or interoperability, and removing the friction when it comes to working across these multiple standards that are developing?
That's a incredibly insightful question. And the reason it is so is because before our very eyes, borders are disappearing, right? So in an e-commerce context, or in a remittance context, or in a cross-border trade context, who knows where the buyer is and who knows where the seller is? And if you have to get buyer data, seller data, especially in a sort of DeFi world, right? You do need standards. And of course, as Visa, you would not expect me to say that there should not be commonality of standards, because perhaps the most incredible brand asset that Visa has is our rules and standards, truth be told, and the consistency of sort of application of those rules across close to 200 markets in the world, right? And so there's got to be a network of networks, or there's got to be regulators sort of fixing it as they go along, sort of thing. But getting somebody in India to get the data from sub-Saharan Africa and for it to look alike, smell alike, feel alike to what you're already used to, because you can then make an independent, sensible decision on that basis, is super, right? Let's talk about identity and KYC, because it's just not lending, right? Because I mean, the AML guidelines are what is prohibiting or choking P2P global remittance. If you can solve for digital identity in a permissioned layer, you can solve for that. But then the artifacts have to be similar. The translation layer has to be there, or the sort of A and B have to talk to each other. Super.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Any thoughts on that, Prashant?
Yeah, look, I think what Visa and Ram have to do is, by virtue of what they do, it has to be global, right? And for me, with LazyPay and PaySense, I'm just trying to get India right. So for me, my problem set is quite contained. And I think for now, at least, I'm not thinking about anything beyond the borders of India. And I think getting this right itself has been quite a challenge. So right now, I'm not thinking about uniformity across international borders. So I think I fully agree with what Ram's saying.
Fair enough. So let's talk about something that clearly you are wrestling with. I'm sure Visa is wrestling with it too, or will wrestle with in the new world, but you definitely are. I know, as this world shapes up. So if we think about how models are being rewritten, right, and there is open data, open access, open finance, banking, and we have alluded to the various infrastructural things that are needed, and various authentication, authorization things that are needed. And models go through a maturity cycle.
Yeah.
But while that happens, real life has to go on. Like, you have to deal with data privacy, you have to deal with possible fraud, possible online identity theft, so on and so forth. So let's take your real scenarios today, Prashant, as you are trying out maybe any open lending models with your partners, so on and so forth. How are you guys foolproofing yourself for the future to deal with this? Because we're just opening ourselves up a lot more compared to the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think there's, lending is a risk management game. It's not a zero risk game. So we obviously have a very conscious, X% that we want to manage to, and that X is not zero. And everything that is between 0 and X is the cost of learning, right? It's not a loss, it's a cost of learning as we ascribe it. And you're absolutely right. Like, we, especially this last year and a half, if you think about it, it's a 1 in 100-year event. And there, obviously, if anyone said, oh, we sailed through it, either they were extremely conservative in their lending to begin with, which means they had zero risk, zero exposure. They were not going anywhere remotely close to the boundary or the edge, or they basically had significant losses, right? And I think those losses are justified given what we as a population have gone through, not just in India, but around the world. So no models hold up in such times. So leaving that aside, you can actually, and I think what has happened is we've all regressed to mean, right? Like, as soon as COVID hit, we all said, we'll only lend to salaried, high bureau score, income through the COVID period, no moratorium availed. So that's something very straight and narrow type of lending. And people who had a cost of funds advantage were able to continue to lend. People who didn't have a cost of funds advantage and were lending on the margin were not able to lend, right? So that's basically what transpired last year. But that means you're just operating without any models. Your chief risk officer just made a call, right? It's just simple if then else, like 5 statements, and you could run a lending shop. But I think we've come past that, right? Again, you can't live in that zone for too long, because let's face it, like we are in the world where you have an HDFC, you have an SBI, you have others, so we can't compete on cost of funds. So we have to kind of, and we're not looking to serve the top 30 million of the country, right? We're looking to serve the top 200, 300 million. And there, the bureau scores are not clear, the income trail is not very clear, the performance, the moratorium, all that, is what it is. So we just go through this adjustment period. We just like systematically open up cohorts, measure those cohorts, and then we work through it. As it pertains to the changing regulation around data privacy and anything else, I think that's par for the course. Ultimately, I think this is about creating a non-toxic environment that is sustainable. And if that's the direction I think the ecosystem is going, we simply just continue to comply with that. For us, we have to maintain a pay-you standard that is a little bit more, I think, regimented and strict as compared to what's in the market. So I think we just uphold that standard internally. I don't know if I fully answered your question, Ganesh. Maybe I missed something. It was a long question, so.
No, yeah, sorry about that. No, I think you partially answered it, but you left off where I think I'll pick up the thread with Ram. Like just like pay-you standards, I think Visa has their own stringent standards. I think Visa probably plays a little bit different role where they're not necessarily always as customer facing as pay-you, but in this world where it's becoming integrated, clearly it's it's a problem for everyone when serious breaches surface. So Ram, how what's the kind of an adjustment thought process and business and system adjustment that Visa probably would envisage in a world like this?
Yeah, so I can tell you, I mean, Visa, obviously, security comes first to us, and we don't have to belabor that point. But I'll tell you what, some of the things that sort of keep us awake is, number one, if you start from the macro level, whether it's payments, lending, open finance, whatever it is, India is taking baby steps towards digitization. There are still a lot of naysayers, there are still a lot of skeptics, there are still a lot of cynics. The last thing we want is for a systemic breach to happen and somebody to say, I told you so, shut the whole thing down, or take one baby step forward and 3 steps back, right? None of us wants that. So if we have to ensure a systemic sort of growth of the entire ecosystem, we have to be absolutely cautious about it. 2, 1, customer permission has to be explicit. Yes, you can go ahead and get my data from XYZ Bank or XYZ insurance company, whatever it is. Not buried in fine print, not a tick box. It has to be explicit. Because then you have, if you come to my website, it automatically means that you can pull all my data sort of thing. I mean, there's a temptation to do that. That's super dangerous. It has to be sort of permission concept, right? And on the other side of it, I mean, the RBI has already taken care of that whole thing of how the movement of bits and bytes from point A through point B to point C. So I'm not very concerned about that. However, like the UK regulator has done, and obviously both of you know this, the sender of data is responsible also if there's any data breaches. Not only do I have to open up my API so that other people can sort of, get my data, but I'm also responsible as a bank if something happens. You know what I mean? So the sender side and the receive side are equally responsible for this data. And lastly, I think before there is again prescription and rules-based as opposed to principles-based regulation, which is always great, one needs to form a SRO of sort of ecosystem participants to ensure this framework is put in place. And towards, making some arguments toward that to all the industry bodies that Visa is represented on. And I think that will be a healthy way to start, even as we start at the ground floor.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think your last point just drives us to the dynamic that we have to proactively live with a lot more collaboration than what we have seen in the past with some of the large incumbents as well. So I know we are probably in the closing time zone now. We have literally maybe 2 minutes left, and number of us have hard stop as well. So last question, maybe quick thought from both of you on what's next. I mean, we talked about so many things that's happening. So what's next, and what do you expect? This ecosystem with an open finance, with the hand of omnipresent hand of open finance, how do you expect it to look like in 3 to 5 years?
I'll quickly go first. I think the world, like I said, I started at the beginning. Think about open banking to open data as one spectrum, and then open banking, open finance to an open economy on the other spectrum. An open economy could be lifestyle data, utilities data, government data, authentication data, IoT data, device data, etc., which enables participants to curate a set of experiences, which I'm sure as we speak, entrepreneurs are working on. And those experiences that are being curated for customers, whether financial or non-financial, will look very, very different 36 months from now. And things are happening at a breakneck. So we've just sort of, unleashed the tiger on this. And, people will sort of create some amazing experiences. So to my mind, an open economy and open experience is the end state. And that's
got it. Open economy, open experience. Prashant?
Yeah, look, I think I'll underscore something I said earlier. I think banking services as we know it are going to change fundamentally, right? And who provides those to us will also change fundamentally with it. I am a huge believer that I think with this shift in relevance will be a shift in where we go and what we seek. I think the consumer that's born today does not differentiate between someone who provides them social services, social applications from banking applications. I think historically we've said, oh yeah, customers deeply care about where they do commerce and and what trust they attribute there, and where they do banking and what trust they attribute there. But I think with world over, I think we've seen a change in trust levels, especially with this next consumer generation that's coming to the economy. That's one dimension that I think about all the time. The second dimension is I think this DeFi and all things crypto is equally a real thing. So I know this is not the topic of conversation today, but I think as someone in the financial services industry, I think speculation and hype aside, there's something quite unique and truly exciting there as well. And I think in the next 5 years we'll see all those things coexist.
Absolutely, and I think it's a parallel world that's getting created much faster than we realize. But we are out of time. I think we'll pick up the thread on a number of these things more offline. And thanks, Prashant. Thanks, Ram. Phenomenal discussion. Thank you very much. And Amit, back to you.
Thank you very much, Ganesh. And thanks to Mr. Ramachandran and Prashant as well for joining us for this session despite their busy schedule. So once again, guys, thank you very much for this very interesting session. And with that, we move on to our next session. And for our viewers, just need to go ahead and refresh your web browser and join us for our next session. We'll see you in a moment's time.